Hello and welcome. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Ashley Taylor. I'm a veteran from Operation Red Wings Foundation. And joining me today are...
I am Ashley Thompson and I'm an Army veteran.
Welcome.
I'm Mesa Villanueva. I'm a Marine and I work at Washington County Solid Waste and Recycling.
Welcome.
I'm Sherry DeWatta and I'm a U.S. Navy veteran and I'm with Red Feather Ranch.
Welcome.
Hello, I'm Beach Pace. I'm a U.S. Army veteran, a West Point graduate. I'm currently the CEO of Big Brothers Big Sisters, and I serve on the Hillsborough City Council.
Wow, welcome. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
So thank you all so much for being here with me today. We're going to have a fascinating conversation today talking about the evolution of women in the United States Armed Forces. But first, a little context.
Why and what are we celebrating? Hello, I'm Vicki Horn, Marine and Washington County Veteran Services Supervisor. More than 400 women fought in the Union and Confederate armies during the Civil War. During both World War I and II, women were called to service because of critical troops shortages. World War I, about 35,000 women officially served, and in World War II, 350,000 women served in the U.S. military in occupations such as nursing, military intelligence, cryptography, parachute rigging, clerical, and many other duties. While women were allowed to serve in the Army and Navy Nurse Corps during peacetime, they were quickly discharged from their regular and reserve forces. This would change on June 12, 1948. President Truman signed the Women's Armed Services Integration Act into law, allowing women to serve in the reserve and regular armed forces during peacetime. Currently, there are more than 2 million women veterans. Women are the fastest growing group in the veteran population. We celebrate the 75th anniversary of the signing of the Women's Armed Services Integration Act, not as a separate Veterans Day, but as a day to acknowledge women as essential to our nation's armed forces, the day they were allowed to serve in the reserve and regular forces during peacetime.
So I'm going to ask y'all a couple questions. Did you notice, and this first one's for you, Ashley. Did you notice any changes for women during your time in service?
Well, I joined in 2012, so I think there was a lot of progress for women by the time I joined. So I started basic training of January, and then summer of 2012, I was stationed in Hawaii at 25th Infantry Division. Mm-hmm. And I remember the conversations about women joining the infantry.
In a huge infantry unit.
Yes, very much so. So I think that it added more pressure on women, like, are you going to do this, or just more pressure overall to fit in a male-dominant unit. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I can see that. Did any of y'all experience that pressure to do more because we had to prove ourselves?
All the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just to be accepted, you had to exceed expectations and tests, etc. So
Yes.
Yes. Ooh, tests. Did you guys notice any difference in how tests were given to women versus men? Anything that stood out to you when being tested?
I mean, for us, as far as like the PFT goes, we had completely different standards as female Marines versus male Marines. Males did pull-ups, we did chin-ups.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Our 3 miles were even like an A+ for a 3 mile. For a male would be I can't remember, like 17 or something like that. But for a female would be like 19 or 21. But completely different standards. Yeah. It's different now. But even back then, it was like women Marines can't do pull-ups, and that's why you guys do chin-ups. You guys don't have the muscles for pull-ups, stuff like that.
Now, would you train together? Like, would you have to hear the male Marines saying this while you were training?
Once we got out into the fleet, yeah. Once we got out into the fleet, we did our PFTs together. So you would definitely see, the men going up to do pull-ups and then the women going to do chin-ups. And it wasn't like you get a choice. It was, you do it.
even if you could, because I'm sure there were many female Marines that could do the pull-ups.
They can, yeah, and they've changed the standard to where women can do pull-ups, I believe. But back then it was still like different muscle groups. You're a woman, you're built differently.
Right.
Yes, that's interesting about that evolution and changing, because when you went through boot camp, there was still male boot camp and female boot camp. Was it like that in the Navy, Sherry?
We were combined.
Yes.
Okay.
but yeah, we ended up running with the males and doing. There was at the time I was in, there was 24 hours where we had to stay awake and we had to go through different obstacle stuff.
Yeah.
So in that aspect, it was the same because we were doing it with the males, but we did have different physical standards.
Yes, I totally forgot about the different physical standards. That is such an interesting factor.
And in the Army, the test was the same, so different than the Marines. The test was the same, but in order to get different grades, you had to perform differently. So, for example, on sit-ups, women's abdominal muscles were seen as equal or to superior to men, and so our sit-ups were equal to or higher. The standards were higher.
Yes, indeed.
But the run and the push-ups were different, right? Just based on the muscle groups, right? What I found interesting is that the Army Physical Fitness Test, the standards may have been different, but the requirements were the same. But when you're on a road march, and let's say you're on a 20-mile road march, nobody stops all the women at 18 miles and said, you're done.
Right.
You do the 20 miles, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's wonderful to hear Ashley's story that she was in an infantry unit. When I served, I was not allowed in an infantry unit. So it's almost like talking to somebody who is a unicorn. And I mean that in the sense of something I never thought I'd see and never thought I'd hear about.
Yeah.
So just hearing that is an example of evolution.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. And I think there's such a difference in different needs that women have when serving in a combat zone. I know, did you experience this even in field exercises, doing infantry training for hygiene purposes? Males would stay out there for 2-3 weeks, but I know they would bus females in.
Yeah.
Did you guys notice any differences there with training and how we have different needs than men hygienically? And I remember I've always felt so lucky. I'm like, I need a shower.
Right. I think it depended on the duration of the field exercise. So if it was less than a week, there was no showers. The expectation is you'll be out there with everybody else and then you'll shower when you come back. But if it was longer than that, they would have like these portable showers. I don't know if y'all remember that, but like our water specialist would set up the portable showers for us.
And I think about that with the different eras, post 9/11 generation, the fact that we even had showers.
Right.
Thinking about our women veterans during the Vietnam era, how do we think they had it during?
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and thinking about the jobs they had too, right? That they were in the medical field or administration, but maybe still had to be, in a combat hospital.
Right.
Yeah.
Very, very different standards and or different expectations. I've always felt like we stood on the shoulders of giants, right? Women who came before us, who made it so we were able to serve.
Yeah.
And I'm very grateful, and I've spoken with some of those women who served ahead of me, and then to hear stories about people who served after me, I'm heartened by it. I'm glad to hear that the changes have been made.
Yeah.
So,
I think I feel the same way because when I was in, we would see a lot of females in male-dominant MOSs. Like a female would be in the construction unit. Typically, you won't see a female in construction. So I think just the changes of our people that served before us. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. You bring up such a good point about all the different fields in the military that so much more than infantry, which we know is male dominated, but services like construction, maintenance.
Yes.
Yeah.
In the nuclear field, I was the second class for them to accept women, females.
Really?
Yeah, from what I understand. And I remember there was conversations about women being on submarines.
Yeah.
And then they had the test run with the one female, and now they're allowed in. And then like women weren't allowed on aircraft carriers, but I was allowed. So yeah, the evolution in
big.
society, it's a big deal to combat those societal norms and expectations of the wider culture.
Yes, you bring up such a good point about in the Navy and submarines they had to test it. We're gonna test letting a woman be on this submarine and sea, and hopefully it goes well.
And can you imagine being the only woman on a sub?
I know.
One? That was the test one? It's like, come on.
Right.
Yeah.
Probably a lot of challenges with that.
Yeah.
Well, that's so cool talking about the aircraft carrier. Tell us about your experience as a woman being on an aircraft carrier.
I ended up flying onto the ship in the middle of their 6-month cruise, and I got a lot of attention.
Someone with
Yeah.
hair, someone with a ponytail. someone with a
Right,
bun.
yeah.
Right.
And it was interesting because I was pretty sheltered. I didn't date, and then I remember just trying to do my share of work and busting my butt with these barrels of stuff. I forget exactly what was in them, but I remember. I just don't. But and then somebody that I didn't even know, not even in my department, was like, "Can I help you with that?" And I thought he was just being nice. I was like, "Sure." So I got him to do some of that stuff, and then I realized, like, oh, this is some of that stuff.
Quid pro quo.
And then also, I had a stalker on the ship, and that was very uncomfortable also. And I would talk about it. People weren't willing to do anything about it until I blew up about it, even though I've talked about it multiple times. And that was even before I was on the ship. I feel like every woman has some kind of story like this.
Yes, and I wonder if the ship's leadership was even equipped to know what to do and willing to know what to do. Did you feel supported?
Not really, not until that time. Looking back, I kind of feel like we were all like 20-year-olds trying to figure out life. And we did have like our chiefs and stuff, but I mean, we don't really see them. They're off doing their own thing.
Right.
We see them in the morning meeting and then they're gone. But like,
And they're like, just do your job.
yeah. So like the professional development, sure, it was there, drills and all the exercises and stuff to be able to do things automatically, having that muscle memory. But when it came to personal development like that, like knowing when no meant no and when to speak up for ourselves, boundaries were not
Right.
talked about. So there was a lot of growing up for myself also in that situation without like in my department there was only 40 females in the whole department, and I don't know how much in my division, but
And would
only
they-
a few.
Would that all be on the carrier?
Yeah, on the carrier it was like anywhere from 4,000 to 5,000 people, and I think the most was like 500 women.
Wow. But that could be anywhere, all over the carrier.
Yeah, so there was 40 of us in reactor department, and then there was some from the air department over here, but then we'd be dispersed all over. I honestly don't know where the other females slept, so like kind of like the unicorn thing, like I see you, I know you exist, but I don't know where you come from.
Right.
Yes.
Doing,
Yeah.
That is such a valid point about showing up and everyone sees, oh, there's a female sailor coming on the ship. Did anyone else have that experience being the known woman in the unit?
Yeah. I was a helicopter engine mechanic for Hueys and Cobras, and talk about being a female Marine in the Marine Corps, and then being a female engine mechanic in the Marine Corps.
Right.
It's like even more unicorny. And so I would, I think at tops at most the number of women that were in my my MOS with me in my division at the Mouse was like 3 3, maybe 4.
3.
But I'm trying to remember who the 4th one was. Probably 3.
Even 4.
And that was
That's
like,
right.
and that was when they were back from deployment. Like,
wow.
so, I remember the 4. But they were lat move. But anyways, so, and even though there was just 4 of us, it didn't feel very like, I was like, oh my God, there's other women here. But at times I felt like, oh, there's another woman here. Like, she better not, like, make us look bad.
Yep. That's
And
another thing.
so
Ruin it
was,
for the rest of us.
Oh.
Yeah.
So even a little tension with the other females when a new one comes, even as a female.
A lot of tension.
it was like,
We've set this standard already.
yeah.
Right.
And it may not be like, it wasn't like a, I don't know, like a tension, but it was more like a, okay, you're here, but I'm going to ignore you because, like, I don't know. It was no sisterhood. Or there was very few times where I felt a sisterhood coming out of boot camp and combat training. But what was I saying?
Well, you bring up a good point about the sisterhood, and that's something we're going to explore in these episodes. Is there a sisterhood? So we will be continuing this conversation. But next, we're going to meet some more women veterans, and then Paul Riggs will join us with our feature interview.
Women in more leadership roles, definitely.
I hope and I pray that there are some things that have changed for women in service since I served in the 80s and was one of the first women to deploy on a Westpac. Things were a little challenging. It was new and unique for all of us, for women and for men who were on board ship. And so I certainly hope that, some of those bugs and things have worked their way out since that time.
My last tour of duty was sitting on the DoD Joint Task Force with other service branch leadership to look at and review the women in the service restriction and make recommendations to the Secretary of Defense on opening those combat MOSs. And the research showed something different than what the decision was made based on the physical, longevity of how long women could serve. And I remember, I just feel like we're not looking at the total career of women serving in the military. I was one of those that second lieutenant wanted to be an infantry officer at the basic school and was told no. First time I was ever told no in my life because women were not allowed to serve. And I think that my career might have been shortchanged if I was allowed to serve based on injuries and based on assignments, stress. Military sexual trauma is increasing. It's not going away. And policy is not going to solve that. So I think there's a couple of things that have changed and gotten significantly disregarded.
They let women wear their hair in a good way now. And there's probably more tattoos. There's probably more women. A little bit anyway. And one of the biggest things was I was in at the time when, they were just a handful of ships that women could go on. And a lot of specialties were closed. So now it's pretty wide open as far as I know.
My guest today is 30-year retired Army veteran, Colonel Betty Pomeroy. Betty, thank you so much for being with us here today. Thank you for your service.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, can you tell me what brought you to the armed forces?
Well, number one, having grown up and learning to read during World War II, almost everyone was in the service. We couldn't go to dentist, we couldn't go for rides, we couldn't do anything except go to the fields and pick the crops and go to school. These women from my hometown that served during World War II, even the lady who became my hairdresser, and gave me my first permanent.
I love that.
Was an Army vet.
Yeah, you had these influences, role models of women that had done it and had come back. As a commission, you came in as a
second lieutenant.
Second lieutenant.
By virtue of having a college degree.
What sort of jobs were available when you received your commission?
Well, there weren't a great deal open. Administrative jobs of all sorts were. We had a lot of young women that were in the medical field. We kind of had a career path that when we finished our 20 weeks of basic training, we either went to the field and worked in one of the WAC detachments, or we went on recruiting. Basically, we all had our basic commitments to the Women's Army Corps before we could branch out. And we had people assigned to what we called career management, and they managed our careers. If they thought we had potential to do this kind of a job or that kind of a job, we kind of looked at them as fairy godmothers at first. They'd sprinkle a little dust and we got to go where we wanted to go, and we got to do the jobs and progress. And so, you know, it was kind of a subtle mentorship initially, but as we grew in our paths, the mentorships became multiple and stronger.
That's excellent.
These are the women who blazed the trails and came in World War II or decided to stay and create the permanent force and helped us grow.
We had a conversation talking about how things had changed, and when you were in basic, the firearms training, they trained you with
an M1, an old repeat rifle.
Okay.
And bolt action, the whole 9 yards.
Mm-hmm.
They gave us 8 rounds, and when I went up to check my target, I had more than 8 holes in my target. Not many in the center, but all on the fringe areas.
Sure.
So my classmates gave me a little help.
We're all just helping to support one another.
Right. I'm not sure 8 of them were mine and my target, but
right.
I had more than my share.
Well, so then how did that change over the years?
Well, you know, 20 years later, I was assigned to the Army staff in Hawaii, and all of a sudden they decided that I hadn't qualified on an M45. Well, all officers have to be qualified on a .45 caliber pistol. So they took me to the range and gave me little instructions on how to break it down and how to put it back together. And I said, man, that thing is heavy. May I hold it with 2 hands? So I managed to get through that, and much to my chagrin, I qualified expert on it. And just to put the guys to shame, the commanding general gave me my badge at a staff meeting. But then that wasn't the end.
No?
Because I later, after that assignment, was selected to command a all-women's basic training battalion at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And so every week that I had troops in field training, I had a chance to fire the M14. So here we go.
Here we go, much bigger than the M1.
Right, but I didn't fire expert on it. I only made sharpshooter.
Only is definitely a way we could phrase that. And when you retired in '88, 30 years after you had received your commission, what do you think? There had been so many more doors had been opened up in those 30 years.
Oh, Paul, it was just extraordinary. By this time, women had been in the military academies for a number of years. They were selected to go to Command and Staff College. They were selected for the Army War College. They were selected for a Defense Institute. They could go any place.
It's a now what, right? What did you take? What did you take from the armed forces with you?
Well, it took a great deal of satisfaction that I had had a wonderful career. I had certainly surpassed my expectations and dreams. Unparalleled and untold gratitude for all the opportunities presented to me. And I think this all goes back to the wonderful mentorship that I had throughout my career, and it's just fulfilled a big dream and a big heart, and I'm still paying it forward.
I love that, Betty. How are you paying it forward?
Well, since I retired, I have spent almost all my time volunteering within the senior and veterans communities, and I find that very rewarding.
Well, that's excellent, Betty. Thank you so much for gathering with us today. Thank you for sharing your stories and your experiences with us, and thank you very much for your service.
Well, thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Betty and Paul. One final question for the group. What are you glad to see now due to the women that came before us? And Ashley, I'll start with you.
I feel a sense of gratitude and thankfulness for the opportunities we have because of the women that came before us.
Good one.
For me, I would say I'm glad to see there are less people underestimating women and our what's the word? Not contribution.
Recognition.
Our badassness. How do I say that?
You just did. That's awesome.
Yes.
All right.
Do I need to rephrase that or okay?
I'm grateful for the foundations that all the women before us have built for us to be able to come in and do our thing instead of having to build it for ourselves. And now we can build up a little bit more and add to that foundation for other women in the future.
Yes.
I love that, Sherry.
I'm heartened by the extent to which the gender integration has happened, thanks to people like Colonel Pomeroy. She mentioned the academies were integrated since she had served. I was one of the women in that integration. So I personally benefited, and I'm grateful for the service that she provided that allowed me and many others to serve.
That's awesome, Beach. Yes. Thank you for joining us today in celebrating the 75th anniversary of women being allowed and recognized to serve in the armed forces.